Good evening, Grapple fans. It is I, Wrestling Revolution Keaton here, the main host of this show, and here is my supporting act, the biggest big daddy in all of wrestling, the so-called wrestling expert, Darren Whiteside.
Guys, I'm not sure where he's getting this. Supporting act? Biggest big daddy? What? Guys, this guy thinks he knows all about wrestling, and he wasn't even born when real, beautiful, stylish, quality, skillful wrestling, it was on our TV screens, and it was absolutely awesome. This kid doesn't even know it existed.
Well, we were having this little debate earlier in the week, and we were talking about what next episode we should do, and we kept fighting about what's better, American wrestling or British wrestling, and that's why we've decided to do this episode.
Yeah.
And it's something that is very much talked about all over. It's a big comparison, but in my opinion, as much as I like British wrestling, it's like comparing Butlins to Disneyland.
What are you talking about? He actually goes to wrestling training. He's actually been on a show recently. He was made his debut as the Kid of Rock, and he was doing a lot of what I would say is chain wrestling, British style wrestling, and he actually excelled at it. Speaking of rock, some sad news in last week, wasn't there? There was a British rock star who passed away, a Hall of Famer in WWE.
Yep, unfortunately, the legendary Ozzy Osbourne passed away.
Yep, and
I can't believe.
I suppose today we're going to talk about British wrestling, and we're going to talk about the influence of American wrestling when it came in. And I suppose it would do no harm to have a little bit of a respectful moment for two absolute greats of the world of wrestling. One that Keaton and I have been very privileged to have met and been welcomed into his house, and Keaton's actually interviewed him, is the late great Kung Fu Eddie Hamill. And who's the other American one then?
And the American one is is the one who so-called popularized wrestling. He did in the 80s and stuff. He made it what it was. He invented the first ever WrestleMania. This guy has made wrestling what it was, and that was the immortal Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea.
So we're going to have a 10 bell salute just very quickly, and we'll stop and reflect on our memories of each of those great performers. So you can probably recognize who this guy is. It says on his t-shirt Hulkamania, and I suppose he embodied American wrestling. Can you remember what his theme tune was?
A real American.
I'm a real American. And I suppose for me anyway, when I look back and I think of what are your first memories of American style wrestling coming to the TV networks in Great Britain, this guy was on it. Anyway, tell us a little bit about your memories of Kung Fu Eddie Hamill, Keaton.
Well, obviously, I'm quite young to remember it as such his matches and stuff. I'm a wrestling historian. I've watched a lot of his stuff. But I've known him after he's retired from wrestling. I went to his house, and he was such a lovely man. Greeted me with absolute kindness. He was such a kind guy. He let me into his house, and interviewed such a legend of British wrestling that was Kung Fu, and it was very sad to see that he passed away. Two greats of their eras of American wrestling and British wrestling have passed away, close to each other's deaths.
Yeah, and it was a really, sometimes when Keaton would go out and do an interview with wrestlers, we don't realise it in the moment that this is a keepsake, and it's something that families can look back on. And Kung Fu Eddie Hamill's daughter Wendy kindly sent Keaton a letter and some trinkets, I suppose, from her father Kung Fu Eddie Hamill's life. He he was one of the best, if not the best. He was one of the ones who probably moved from the chain wrestling into the high flying style that maybe blended closer towards the American style. Would that be fair?
You're right. He actually said himself that he was doing stuff that nobody else was doing at the time. Because he was doing like crazy stuff that a lot of wrestlers would have despised. They'd be like, oh no, I hate that. But what Eddie Hamill done it, Eddie Hamill, when I've interviewed him, he's always said that he doesn't really like American wrestling because like they would wrestle with a chair and things like that. Like they would get a chair and hit each other up the head with it, and they would do weddings and stuff. But I don't think it's needed. But what Eddie done was he done a lot of high flying wrestling, but it was in the ring and that was it. There was none of this weddings and all going on, all this random storylines. He wrestled in the ring and done high flying wrestling, and he mixed it up with technical wrestling to make it look good, and that's why he became such a popular wrestler.
Yeah.
The amazing Kung Fu.
In some of the messages that Kung Fu's daughter has sent us, and she even sent a letter to Keaton, and it mentioned within it that she was delighted to see her daddy's eyes lighten up when he was reminiscing, when Keaton was asking him questions that brought him back to some of those old wonderful times of in the ring and on the TV and, you know, high flying and everything that came with that wonderful era of World of Sport British wrestling. What did she send you, Keaton?
Got it here. I was kindly sent a letter from Wendy. So let's get it out here. Which one should we get out first?
Whatever you think's handiest.
This one is incredible. I will always cherish this. Wendy sent me, who's Kung Fu Eddie Hamill's daughter, sent me an original Kung Fu Eddie Hamill poster. This is one of the first that she could find. So this is one of the first posters.
And I see it's from Dale Martin Promotions. We chatted about them last time in the last episode. Dale Martin Promotions were pretty big back in the day, Keaton, yeah?
Yep.
And who was Kung Fu Eddie Hamill up against them in this one?
So he was in the main event. It was Kung Fu Eddie Hamill versus Bobby Barnes, one of the biggest at the time in British wrestling. Wow. He was very good and Eddie got to face him. And along that on the poster we have so there's Mike Moreno, there's Tornado Torontos, and John Elijah,
Bob Kirkwood and Caswell Martin.
So there's people from all over the world on this one. It's hard to see, but there was people from Chicago, there was people from all places in England, and even the Northern Irishman, Kung Fu Eddie Hamill, was there as well.
Yeah.
And it was on this, I've just realised this, actually right now, the British Mid Heavyweight Championship was actually on this, which is amazing.
That's pretty awesome. And it was in a place called Tunbridge Wells, Keaton. I'm guessing that's in England. Can I see the bottom of it again?
Absolutely.
So guys, at the bottom of this poster, there's actually the prices. It was, to get into the show, 80p, 60p, 50p and 40p, inclusive of that. My goodness. Much as it to get into shows these days, Keaton, do you know?
£505 for two people.
It's steep, isn't it? What a beautiful thing to send. An original Dale Martin Promotions poster. This is, you know, in Keaton's eyes, it's priceless. These things,
it is.
You know, they're very, very rare, but it's very, very kind as well. And we're extremely grateful that Wendy took the time to send Keaton this because, you know, his little interview with her father meant so much.
It really did. And I want to thank Wendy a lot if she's watching this as well. So Wendy, if you're watching this, thanks very much. And also got a thing. So this was the Kung Fu fan club. So again, this just shows how cool this is. So it's only 60p. This just shows how much times have changed with money and stuff. 60p, and it was the Kung Fu fan club. So on joining it, it says here you would get a membership card, a photo of Kung Fu, a Kung Fu pen, result sheet, newsletters, dates when Kung Fu is wrestling in north and south of England, and special offers.
Guys, that's 60.
I would pay for that.
No doubt about it. 60p to join the Kung Fu
a year
club. Now that's not just for a week. This is for the whole year's subscription. 60p. How awesome was it to live back in those days? What else was sent? We'll not read it. It's a private letter that Wendy sent, but it was really heartfelt and very much appreciated, especially as she's still grieving for the loss of her father.
And then we've got one more here. So this is just a great photo here of Kung Fu Eddie Hamill.
Yeah. And do you remember when we were with Kung Fu and we were in their house? He also gave you a photograph?
Yes, he did.
Can you remember what it looked like?
It said to Keaton, best wishes from Kung Fu.
Yeah. Of course, he can remember what it looks like. It's right beside his bed, and it has always been there ever since that interview. It's Kung Fu Eddie Hamill in a drop kick position, isn't he, in the midair?
You know, he was actually taking him out, so he was taking a head drag on it.
Right. And he signed it, and he wrote on it to Keaton, best wishes, Kung Fu.
Yeah.
Hi, awesome. Hi, awesome.
Incredible guy.
Anyway, back to the show, guys. We are going to talk a little bit about British wrestling versus American wrestling. And as you probably know from previous episodes, I'm a big fan of old style British wrestling, and big fan of the likes of Big Daddy, Jan Haystacks and all of that era, and obviously Kung Fu Eddie Hamill, Fit Finlay, and you know, Rollerball Rocco and all of those guys, William Regal and stuff. So Keaton, where are we going to start with this one today?
So we'll start from the start.
Okay.
So we'll start with, obviously Hulk Hogan's died and Kung Fu Eddie Hamill's died, two immortal names and two incredible names.
Yeah.
So let's name the two biggest of their 2 eras and kind of compare them, I suppose.
It's hard to say who is the biggest of their eras. You know, I certainly remember, and I mentioned it in the first episode, sitting with my father in the living room watching World of Sport wrestling show, and I think it was around about 4 o'clock or something, and we loved it. We believed it. We watched it and thought every single thing in it was real. It was gritty. It was hard hitting, and it was believable. It wasn't high flying. There wasn't a lot of theatrics. There wasn't a lot of storylines. There wasn't a lot of fireworks or that sort of thing. And then I remember getting to see some of the American style wrestling, but I remember my father's attitude towards it, and mine's probably a little bit similar, although I probably have lessened my attitude towards American style wrestling now, because I'm subscribed to their channels and Netflix and everything now. But back then, it was nearly like everything we watched on the British wrestling, we believed. We believed it was, everything about it was real. It wasn't scripted. The hits were hard. The hits were real. But when the American style wrestling was on TV, and the first one I remember was, I think it might have been Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan. And
This was your first memory?
I think it was, yeah. And there was theatrics, there were lots of razzmatazz, there were loads of colourful outfits and so on. The spectacle.
Like I said, it's like comparing Butlins to Disneyland.
Well, that's the thing. Butlins is real. Disneyland is, let's face it, people dressed up in costumes. So for me, and for what my father had said back in them days, I wouldn't even watch that. It's so unrealistic. It's like a pantomime. It's a waste of time watching these guys running about in suits pretending to hit each other, and it wasn't really for us. So I never got to watch it, unfortunately.
I'm going to ask you this question, and this is just going to change the whole podcast. So you're telling me you wouldn't watch this because you think they're not hitting each other and it's all fake? Yeah.
When it first came in, yes, that's what I thought.
Why would you watch a movie? Why would you watch When You're a Kid He-Man if it was fake?
And I remember one of the first films I went to see, well, one of the first ones I remember in the cinema was Jaws. And Jaws was a big rubber, plastic, mechanical shark. But we paid money knowing that we're going to see something, and we knew it was a film, but it was believable and it was a film. We weren't watching something in the eyes of sport and competitive things that were predetermined and scripted. That's what we thought anyway.
Well, I am a bit disgusted that I told you why would you not watch a movie if you think the wrestling's fake? Why would you watch a movie? But and this little comeback is just very strange. But I'm too disgusted to come on with this, so we're going to talk about the differences between American wrestling and British wrestling.
Well, did you take that on board though?
You went to see Jaws.
We watched sport for a competitive, outcome that we just weren't sure that it would be. So sport was different than a movie. Sport was something else. We didn't know if Man United were going to beat Liverpool, and we didn't know the outcome most of the time of the British wrestling because they were so good at what they did.
All I took from what you said there was that you went to watch a rubber shark.
Sorry about him, guys.
So wrong. But what are the differences between British wrestling and American wrestling? I'll kind of start here. So,
Okay.
I think, as you said there, I kind of agree with some of it. Like Mr. TV, Jackie Paulo, and Rollerball and Mark Rocco, they were guys who could actually wrestle.
Yeah.
A lot of guys in this era of American wrestling, if a rope breaks, would be like to themselves, what am I going to do here? What am I going to do? Hit the ropes here? But they need to know that. But what you do is you wrestle, because you should be taught how to wrestle, not how to be a strong man and body slam someone. You need to be taught how to wrestle. So back in them days, I believe it was better to get. It was easier to get over in British wrestling than it was in American wrestling. Way easier.
When you say get over, what do you mean?
So for our viewers, what over means is, for the fans to like you, if you come out without any charisma or anything, it doesn't really matter in British wrestling, because they care more about the technical side. Or are you skillful enough in the ring? If you're skillful enough in the ring, you got over. Where in American wrestling, it didn't matter if you weren't skillful enough in the ring. Now, Hulk Hogan shaped the business. He wasn't all that good in the ring, but he had the character and everything like that. So that's what it was like in American wrestling. It didn't matter if you weren't good in the ring. If you had that character, that's what took you up to 100. But in British wrestling, it was way, way easier to get over, because all you had to be was Johnny Saint, who was an incredible wrestler in the ring. So all you needed was your training and to be skillful in the ring, and that's all you needed to get over until maybe ITV came in and there was more characters mixed in with it.
Yeah, there's something in that. American style wrestling, I think they relied on the larger than life characters. They relied on the larger than life storylines. But you're right, I didn't really see Hulk Hogan as being an exceptionally good wrestler. He hit people with a leg drop. He had a fairly strong clothesline. But if he was to try and compete with the likes of Marty Jones or Rollerball Mark Rocco, he'd have been tied up in knots. Let's face it. Yep, you had the razzmatazz, but did you have the skill? And I don't know if American wrestlers had the same skill level as the British wrestlers.
Some of them did, some of them didn't. The likes of the Rockers, Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels, and then there was Bret Hart, people like that, they had the skill, but it depended. They got good to a certain extent, but it got to the level of their characters. That's what made them as good. Again, as I said there, it was way easier to get over in British wrestling.
Yeah. I suppose British wrestling had all the holes. Can you think of anyone who had 1,000 holes?
There was Johnny Saint.
Johnny Saint. And he had all of those different holes. He would have tied people up in knots, and soon enough they would be tapping out. Soon enough they would be lost. Some people were in and out of holds before you could nearly blink. They were so fast and they were so good. I don't recall too many. You've got your Andre the Giant Hall of Famer, you've got, Big Show, you've got Hulk Hogan and so on. Would they have competed if they had came over to somewhere in Britain?
Right, I'm going to give you this argument. I'm just going to say 4 words.
Okay.
Big Daddy Giant Haystacks.
They filled Wembley Arena.
But then you're saying
there were no seats left and it was totally sold out. It was an absolute wonderful spectacle of 2 giants of the game.
But then you're not going by your own point here, because you're kind of like, you're not going by your own point. What you're saying is, all these characters weren't all that good because all of them were characters like Hulk Hogan and all. But then I say to you, Big Daddy Giant Haystacks, and then you say to me, in British wrestling they sold out everywhere and that's all that mattered. But then you start talking about how skilled they all were.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Well, there are obviously exceptions to the rule. We were very fortunate to live in Northern Ireland and to have some superb wrestlers, superbly skillful wrestlers coming through. And they weren't massive, as in, in their physical stature, but they were very skilled. And one of them works for WWE now, and his name is Dave Finlay. And what can you remember about him?
I remember watching him in WWE when he first got into WWE with Hornswoggle and stuff. That's when I first discovered him. Yeah. I used to be a very big Hornswoggle fan. But I've also watched some of his old stuff in World of Sport Wrestling. And the big thing about this guy was he could change his style. He knew how to wrestle, that's the thing. He could change his style so quickly. When you watch him in WWE, you probably think, this guy can't really wrestle because he's just a character. But he didn't really need to, because he had the kind of marketed him as the Belfast Brawler. So he would have done stuff like pull the ring apron and punched you, clothesline, things like that, hard hitting instead. But if you watch back to his World of Sport wrestling instead, you can see that he could do technical wrestling as well. And that's why I think he's one of the best known Irish wrestlers ever.
Yeah, he was something else. So we've mentioned William Regal, Johnny Saint, Fit Finlay, all outstanding British wrestlers. And who employed them?
They're employed by WWE. Johnny
Why-
Saint isn't.
Is he not anymore?
Not anymore.
But he was. Yeah, so we've got some of the best British wrestlers, and they have been employed by one of the biggest American wrestling company, WWE. Why have they chosen the British wrestlers to come and coach the Americans?
Oh, well, I think the main thing with WWE is they have all the characters, and that's what's good about it. But they also need to have, if something goes wrong in the ring, like the ring breaks or the rope breaks or something like that, and they're like saying to themselves, I don't know what to do, then wrestle. You're wrestlers, you're supposed to know how to wrestle. But a lot of them don't know that, so that's why they need to get the likes of Johnny Saint in, who do all his technical wrestling. They need to get they need to still have Fit Finlay there, people like that, and William Regal.
So would it be fair to say that there's more skill in British wrestling than American wrestling?
Possibly. But when you also think about it, you can't compare British wrestling to American wrestling. American wrestling, like, name something good about British wrestling. Now, there is loads of good things about it, I'm not saying there isn't, but just name something good about British wrestling and I'll get to it.
Raw talent.
Raw talent. But American wrestling's raw talent got bigger and bigger and was seen all across the world. That's what I've seen in Britain.
Well, their show was seen across the world. Did their talent get better?
Well, yeah.
Well, I suppose if the British people came over and trained them. You've been to a number of wrestling reunions with older wrestlers who have been in the game for a while, and you've interviewed many of them, and you have asked the question, what were your thoughts on American style wrestling when it came in? What was the general answer from the majority of them?
The majority of them said that it killed British wrestling.
How did it kill British wrestling?
See, this is one of the main things I want to talk about here. So, the reason that it killed British wrestling was because, you know, the Americans had more money. They were able to get TVs because in Britain, you said before they had about 4 channels.
Yeah.
But in American wrestling, they made it what it was, like television and stuff. So because they had like all the power in television, what they done was they had more money. They had pyro. They had bigger things, and people wanted to see. So the old sport of British wrestling, like Greco-Roman style wrestling and all these different styles of wrestling, that was more real wrestling. But people wanted that were kind of getting bored of that. So WWE came in, or at the time when it was first like brought in, was WWF, and Vince McMahon Senior had decided, I want to make this bigger. I want to make this not boring no more. And not that it wasn't boring, but it was more exciting. Kind of seeing, you know, Batista with the pyro and Hulk Hogan, but at the time, like the bigger ones like Bruno Sammartino and stuff that really popularized it. That's why it kind of killed British wrestling, because the pyro, the more lights, the development, the characters and stuff that were involved in it. I don't think the British wrestling had minds like that. It's not that they didn't. I think that they didn't want to do it because they were more interested in getting real wrestling in, wrestling that was real, whereas American wrestling wanted more money, bigger pyro, and it's, again, like I said, they're like comparing Butlins to Disneyland.
I remember speaking with one of them. He worked in the same company who built the Titanic. It's a company called Harland and Wolff, and the company called Shorts beside it as well. And he mentioned that he went and he worked hard all week, and maybe twice a week on an evening after working maybe 7 till 6 or something, he'd go out exhausted but get himself ready and go to one of his wrestling shows. He'd maybe get 20 or maybe 40 pounds for a gig, and then he'd come home and he'd be maybe traveling the length of the country, coming home after 12 at night and getting up at 5 in the morning to get ready and get into work for 6. And there wasn't a lot of money. There was a fair bit of kudos, and a lot of people really enjoyed themselves when they were out at these things, and there were, you know, fans after them, and, you know, they were getting a bit of attention from the ladies and all that. But if you're sitting there and you're working all week, you're going and you're potentially putting your body on the line, breaking bones for 20 quid or for 40 pounds, and then you turn on the TV and you see all this razzmatazz and people are getting maybe 10 times what you're getting. would you be maybe, and you're probably thinking these guys aren't as skilled as me as well, would you be a bit jealous, or would you be a bit, I don't respect that because it's such a production but they don't actually have any moves?
Possibly. Not that all of them didn't have moves, just like the bigger characters weren't as good. That was just kind of the same way with British wrestling. The bigger characters like Big Daddy, John Haystacks were a spectacle to watch.
Yeah.
People paid to see John Haystacks, not just for the wrestling, but just because of the size of them. Man.
Yeah. Well, tell me this, what's your favourite American match of wrestling?
There's lots that I could name. I enjoyed. I think Ricky Steamboat versus Macho Man Randy Savage. That was an incredible match.
Yeah,
you know,
it was.
Ricky Steamboat had so much storytelling in a match. Storytelling in a match is quite big, and then also they were the most skilled ones out of all of them.
Yeah. And for me, I've no doubt it's Marty Jones and Rollerball Mark Rocco.
Yeah, in British wrestling, I agree.
Yeah, and through the rounds, you could see, you know, these guys were, you know, starting off, they were feeling each other out. They were, you know, they were going at the right pace, and they were doing all the moves that I've never seen American wrestlers do. Soon enough, they actually got faster as the rounds went on. I remember I think it was the fourth round, Marty did a monkey flip on Mark Rollerball Rocco, and somehow as he hit the canvas, his body jumped up like 3 feet in the air, and he landed in a headstand on the ropes. This is a couple of guys in a town hall in a small town in Great Britain somewhere. No razzmatazz, no no massive lights, no pyro, just raw, unadulterated skill. You don't get that with American wrestling.
I agree that was an incredible match. I think it's better than most of the American stuff you see, but saying that you don't get skill in American wrestling is the biggest lie I've ever heard.
Well, it's progressed, and it's certainly gotten a lot better.
But another thing with American wrestling is storytelling.
Yeah.
So with World of Sport, you would see some good storylines, like with Kendo Nagasaki unmasking the mask. After so many times, Big Daddy would try to rip off the mask, something that you shouldn't do to a man in a mask, something
True.
that's not supposed to be done. So he'd rip off the mask, and Big Daddy would be the one continuing to win all the matches. And Fit Finlay and Marty Jones had a good storylines and stuff, but there wasn't really much storyline involved in World of Sport. They maybe lasted for maybe a little while and then kind of stop it, but it was more about the technical wrestling, whereas with American wrestling it was about the storylines, and the storylines is what made it.
Yeah, I suppose so. Fit Finlay had Princess Paula, and then there was, in America, there was Miss Elizabeth.
Yeah, Miss Elizabeth.
And who was her partner?
Macho Man Randy Savage.
And there were a few storylines with Macho Man Randy Savage being a bit jealous and being a bit possessive over his wife, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose some of those storylines ran for ages, didn't they?
Yeah.
But back to Great British Wrestling, and I'm saying Great British Wrestling because it was great. It was better than anything that's came out since, and anything that has been before.
One British wrestler who actually knows British wrestling, this is the only one I can really think of, Zack Sabre Jr.
Very talented wrestler, yeah.
He knows all the holds and stuff, and speaking of holds, one of the greatest matches I've ever seen, and it obviously had Zack Sabre Jr. in it, was with Mike Quackenbush. Mike Quackenbush is an American, but he knows all the technical wrestling, he knows all the holds. He's quite good friends with an old British wrestler. You might know his name, you might know who he is if you're watching this, if you're a British wrestling fan. Johnny Kidd. He's quite good friends with Johnny Kidd, and Johnny Kidd would kind of show him some of the technical wrestling, and Mike Quackenbush has kept that on, and now he's passing on the tactical wrestling to whoever he coaches. And one of the best matches, modern day technical wrestling matches that you'll see that no one else normally sees, and is Zack Sabre Jr. versus Mike Quackenbush.
Yeah, and I suppose Mike Quackenbush is an example of someone who has learned to love and respect the British style of, the chain wrestling, all of those holds, and he sort of took on the mantle then after, was it Johnny Kidd and Johnny Saint and the Master of 1,000 Holds. Yeah, and a lot of respect for Mike Quackenbush. He seems to know quite a lot about British wrestling and has a lot of friendships within the wrestling circle. Getting back to Kung Fu Eddie Hamill, you were talking there about you should never take a mask off one of the wrestlers. Can you remember a story that Eddie told you about his mask having to be taken off?
Yep. So this is the crazy thing. So while I was in the middle of an interview with him, he was telling me that everybody was copying his gimmick. So people all around the place were still wearing all the kung fu masks and trying to copy Eddie Hamill. So Eddie Hamill, he went up to Max Crabtree, and he says that Max Crabtree was one of the guys who was just one of the biggest brains in wrestling. And Max Crabtree said to him, "Take the mask off." He says, "I can't take my mask off, Max." And Max says to him, "No, if you take the mask off, no one's going to be able to copy you anymore." So he got in the middle of the ring, he took the Kung Fu Eddie Hamill mask off, and then he became the Amazing Kung Fu, who people loved. He was a ladies' man after that, and he showed his pretty boy gimmick, I suppose, inside wrestling, and that's what got him to where he was.
Yeah, pretty awesome. British wrestling versus American wrestling. British wrestling was around well before British wrestling was around before America was America.
You're right, it was there before America was a state. You're right, I can't argue with that.
British wrestling, was around when, small indie federations were going around, sort of like a travelling circus. A wee bit like the American territories eventually became. There's likes of, can you remember the name George Hackenschmidt? Who was he?
So George Hackenschmidt was a guy, I think he done a lot of Greco-Roman as well, but he done Olympic wrestling, and in that time, and he's one of the toughest guys there was. People were actually getting bored of seeing him because of how good he was, and they needed to change the rules up a bit just so George Hackenschmidt could be beat, because he was unbeatable. No matter what, every single match he had, George Hackenschmidt was unbeatable.
So it was a foregone conclusion what the result was going to be.
Yeah.
It'll be a bit boring after a while, knowing that this guy's going to bring someone up and he's going to whip them.
But like Big Daddy.
Would it be fair to say that Americans were influenced by British wrestling?
I personally don't think so. I don't think that they found influence from British wrestling at all. British wrestling was more technical, more real set of wrestling, where American wrestling was more storylines and more predetermined winners. So I don't think that they took any influence from British wrestling, no.
Eventually, did American wrestling influence British wrestling?
Yeah.
Yes, in what way?
Well, when the territories were going along, British wrestling was kind of stopping because it was branded as just the word fake. Okay. So it was just branded as fake, and people didn't respect that because they wanted to see more sport at the time in Britain. And the British wrestling saw the territories, so they decided to make it more of instead of this brutal style of wrestling, this brutal all-in style of wrestling that existed. They decided to maybe copy one of the territories and turn it into a TV promotion, World of Sport Wrestling, and that's where people fell in love with the characters like Big Daddy, hated the characters like Mick McManus, Mighty John Quinn, and Jan Haystacks, and loved the characters of, as I said, there, Kung Fu Eddie Hamill, a legend who's gone but never forgotten, and these guys were absolutely loved all across the country, and some of them were hated all across the continent.
So America and American style wrestling and WWE, let's face it, they're the big dogs, and they took over pretty much the world of wrestling.
They just did,
yeah. And World of Sport then ceased. It stopped, and it then was born again in the 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Would there have been a more of an American style or American influence in the new World of Sport?
Yeah, there was. It was awful. Just being honest, it was awful. They brought in the likes of Grado, people like that. I'm not going to say anything bad about Grado. I like Grado and Sam Bailey and all the newer style of British wrestlers, but it was never going to work out well because the people that are watching it, it's called World of Sport Relaunch, but all it was American stuff. And one of the commentators actually says, if you used to watch World of Sport Wrestling as a family and you're watching it again, you're probably shocked. People probably were shocked because how bad it was.
Yeah.
It was people jumping off ladders and stuff. That wasn't British wrestling. That's American wrestling. It would work out well in American wrestling, and that's why it stopped, because it wasn't World of Sport, and they're calling it a World of Sport relaunch of a channel.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense.
Well, shall we agree that British wrestling was the best in the beginning?
Okay.
And soon enough, for a long time, British style wrestling was the best and most skillful wrestling there was on the planet.
On the planet? Lucha Libre and stuff, but yeah, we'll say that they were the most skillful on the planet.
Okay.
Yeah, they were the most skillful, but again, with American wrestling, like I've said, they had better characters and storylines, and we'll just have to face that. So they're better in their own different ways.
Yeah.
American wrestling's more for TV. British wrestling's more for a proper sport, in my opinion.
Yeah. And you have a friend, we've both got a friend called Nick Campbell, who wrote a book called
Falls, Brawls and Town Halls.
Falls, Brawls and Town Halls. And there's a clue in the name that it was gritty, it was town halls, it was, you know, it wasn't any big razzmatazz, and it wasn't needed. The wrestling spoke for itself in the rings and in those small town halls, and they were packed every chance they got. And that's the difference, I think. You know, they didn't need the storylines, they didn't need the fireworks, they didn't need the razzmatazz.
I agree, but again, I think it's more for down halls. It's not it's more for sport. Where American wrestling is more for TV, and British wrestling is more for sport. Can we agree with that?
I'm happy to agree with that. Okay, so let's say British wrestling's the best.
Okay, well, if you want to say that, that's cute.
I'll take it.
If you want to say that, that's cute. So, want to thank you all very much for watching. We just decided to do that wee tribute because we wanted to pay tribute to one of the greatest American wrestlers and one of the greatest British wrestlers. These people will never be forgotten. I want to thank Wendy for this incredible present that she gave me and things like that. And I want to thank everyone for watching. And hopefully we'll see you in the next one. From me, have a good week. Till next week.
Bye for now.